Welcome to the Boomer Briefing Podcast, where we help you solve a critical business issue in 20 minutes or less. I'm your host, Sandra Wiley, president at Boomer Consulting, and with me today is Jon Hubbard. Hi, Jon, and thank you for being on this episode of the podcast.
Hi, Sandra, and thank you for having me.
You know, Jon is our Chief Growth Officer at Boomer, and today we're going to be chatting about strategies for smooth relationship transitions. Firms are challenged with transitioning clients from one person or group of people to another. To some, this is a new strategy that you're wrapping your arms around and trying to figure it out. For others, you've been doing this for a while, but you need new tips and tricks on how to do it more efficiently. Today, Jon and I will discuss strategies for making those relationship transitions a little bit smoother. So, Jon, why don't you take just a few minutes and introduce yourself to our audience?
Yes. So as Sandra mentioned, I'm Jon Hubbard, Chief Growth Officer, one of our shareholders here at Boomer Consulting, and I get the privilege of working with firms largely in the area of growth, whether that's growth of their leadership team, whether that's growth of their talent, or growth of just their firms overall. And one of the topics that isn't necessarily new, but we are seeing a complete refocus or re-energization. Is that even a word?
I think that's a word.
I think it's a word, especially, yeah.
It is now.
We'll use it. Take that. Is around successfully transitioning client relationships. And the reason why there's such a huge focus on it now is a few different things. Sandra, would it be okay if I share a few of those different reasons why it's a huge focus right now?
I think that's great. You bet.
Okay. So obviously we've been hearing a lot about, and the reality is the retirement of baby boomers. And with that comes just a lot of client transitions. Sandra, I was talking with one of our clients who you know really well a couple of weeks ago, and they made this statement. They said, Jon, over the next 16 to 18 months, we will be transitioning more clients than we have in the last 10 years. And the point of our conversation wasn't even really about client transition. It was more about growth of the firm. But then that came up. And that is related to a couple things. So one, the baby boomers retiring and the transitioning of clients there. Second reason is I think every firm out there, whether you're experiencing that baby boomer transition or not, is trying to think more strategically about the growth that they want to experience. And when you think about that growth you want to experience, one of the conversations that always falls out of that is a couple different things. One is, do we have chunks of our client base that really aren't part of our future that we might need to transition out? And then two, do we have the right people working on the right clients? Or are there partners that aren't working on partner level clients that maybe they should be transitioned to lower level staff, or that lower level staff that wants opportunity to grow, wants to be doing more, but isn't having those types of clients transition to them? So I think when you combine, Sandra, all those perspectives, I think that's why we're seeing such a refocus on making sure that we successfully transition clients well.
Yeah, and I think all those scenarios you just talked about are reasons why firms are starting to really think and focus on this. Now, the truth is, I think it's been happening for a long time, but I think it's more intentional now. Mm-hmm. And I feel like people are more open to it now. We're working hard. Everybody's working hard, but are we working hard doing the right things? And some of that applies to this whole, where should they be sitting? Should they be sitting with different people, different levels? Maybe not with our firm, maybe with a different firm. So I think all of those things are happening, and it's making us think differently about what clients we should be working with and who should be working with them. So, you know, when I think about the scenarios of transition, you started going in that direction and talked about it a little bit already, but baby boomers getting ready to exit the firm or at least change their position within the firm. We have a change in the business model. But what are some of the scenarios where you think transition really needs to happen as you're working with firms in that growth area? What are some of the scenarios that you see that are maybe a little different than maybe we've seen in the past, or maybe, again, just more intentional now than we've seen in the past?
Yes. So a couple different things. And I kind of look at it as almost as if it's layers of a cake. Let me break that down a little bit. One is it is that transition from clients that have traditionally worked with a maybe specific partner in the firm, that client transition or that client really needs to be transitioned to maybe a manager. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's that level, it's that layer that we see a lot of opportunity. And that may be related to that partner transitioning out. That may be related to the right work at the right level, things of that sort. But often that's a scenario where a lot of firms are quick to realize and to recognize that something needs to be happening. Where I think there's a scenario where is often overlooked is, and Sandra, you and I have had the privilege of training our helping run our leadership academy over the years. And so we see this next level, this next scenario that I'm getting ready to talk about. That is that 3 to 7 year professional, maybe that manager that is getting a lot of work transitioned to them. And they're in what we call the squeeze spot in the firm, where they actually have too much work being put on their plate. And there actually needs to be a rethinking of, well, what clients should we actually transition from them to someone else, to a non-manager, to someone that maybe we want to upskill, we want to, maybe they're on the management track, but we need to fill their plate with higher quality work. Mm-hmm. It's that scenario that we think is sometimes overlooked, which creates a whole nother podcast episode, Sandra, of putting our best and brightest in a squeeze spot for too long, and they end up looking elsewhere.
Yep. I was sitting here thinking about, it's like a cascade, right? You talked about the layers of the cake. It's also like a cascade. If we have partners or people that are getting ready to either transition out or they've got too much on their plate and they need to be doing other things in the firm, they have to push it to another level. That level can't catch it unless you push it to a different level. And what I find really fascinating, I think you probably find the same thing also, is that people are more than willing to catch the work and learn how to do it. And they like having higher level work, no matter what level you're talking about. And I think automation and outsourcing have helped us in that too, that we can actually push some of this work to other places. But it frees up. I think the thing that's beautiful about all of this is that it really frees up people to be able to catch really interesting higher level work that will, like you said, keep them at the firm. What we don't want is those people out looking because they're bored or they feel like, I've kind of grown beyond this and I need something else. We need to recognize that first within the firm as we're looking at transitioning those clients. I think sometimes we get in our own way. And leaders have a tendency to think, oh, they're not ready for that yet. When truthfully, they may not be, but they will be if they just try to do it, right? If we let them catch it quicker. So, I think you're absolutely on target there. You work with a lot of firms out there, either through the circles that we run or through the consulting you do or the training that we've done. Can you think of a time where the transition that someone was trying to make from one level to another, you can pick any level you want, that it was truly successful? You went, wow, that was an amazing pass off. And it was a really great way for them to work together. And then a time maybe after that it wasn't very successful, that it was tried, but it kind of fell flat. So can you think of some examples like that?
Yes, absolutely. So one is, I'll start with where the transition goes well, or where it went well. When you think about a client transition, there are actually three stakeholders there. Sometimes we think there's just two. It's just a person working on their stuff and it's a client. Well, there's actually a third stakeholder. That is the individual that client is being transitioned to. So you have, let's just use the example of a partner that needs to transition a client. So you have the partner, you have the client, and then you have, let's say, the manager that the client is being transitioned to. Well, where we see client transitions going well is when all three of those parties are considered before the transition begins, properly considered and heard before the transition begins. So that might look like, in this example, the partner understanding that, all right, the transition needs to happen. I'm ready to make that transition. I understand that the transition needs to happen, and I'm going to help make that transition as smooth as possible. Then you have the manager that the client is going to. He or she has been talked with. Their opinions have been heard around, okay, here's what a good client transition looks like to me. That may get into things like timing, the speed, the way and the type of client that it is, but that's been considered. And then, of course, the client's perspective as well. What does it feel like to experience a client transition when you're the client? A lot of people out there are transitioning clients but have never been in that seat before, and they don't think enough about what it's like to experience that client transition from a client perspective. So where we see it have gone really well is when those three things are, those three perspectives are really taken into consideration. The other thing I would add in terms of where we see it going really well is when you start it before you absolutely have to start it. Start it when you don't need it. Start it when you know it needs to happen, but not necessarily like, okay, we got to make this client transition now. Sandra, I shared with you that I was just speaking with a firm that said they're going to be having more client transitions over the next 18 months than the last 10 years combined. That same day, I spoke with another client, and they said, I'm having a lot of clients transition to me. I said, oh, really? And they said, yeah, it's coming in batches, but I just had 100 clients put on my desk. And I said, 100? How long has that been in the works? It's been in the works for 2 weeks. That's it. There's no, and it's like, okay. And so what does that do to the client? What does that do to the person that the clients are being transitioned to? And ultimately, what does it do to the person the clients are being transitioned from? And so, start before you need to. And then the third thing I would say, and this gets into really one of the success criterias, and you've done this with me, Sandra, so we can even have some personal stories if we want to share that as well, is really position. When client transitions go well, they're transitioned and their message to the client, not because, hey, I have too much work to do, and so I need to give you over to Jon here, or I need to hand you. It is really teeing up the professional that you're transitioning the client to and really speaking them up, really highlighting their expertise, really highlighting the care and the attention that they're going to be providing you as a client. And really, you're in the driver's seat. When you are the partner in this scenario, transitioning that client, you are in the driver's seat of the messaging. You have so much influence in how that transition is perceived. And frankly, it's on you to be able to really message that transition well. So kind of a long answer, but I wanted to touch on a few different things of when client transition goes well. It's those three things that happen.
I love that. And you're right. We have had that happen here at Boomer Consulting, where we've had transitions. At one time, it was Gary Boomer transitioning things to many of us in the company. Today, it is me transitioning many things in the company. And part of it is just getting busy. Part of it is a change of what we're doing in the company. But I think the most rewarding times that I have transitioned a client from my group of clients that I'm working with to somebody else in the company, you're one of them. You're a great example. Is when at the end of the day, we have done everything we need to do. We've shared the stories around that client. We have shared what we've done in the past with them. We have shared the stories of what's happening with that client, what's happening in their company or their firm. And then by the time that we finally say to the client, just so you know, I'm actually going to step out of this strategic planning or community or whatever it is next year, and Jon is going to be taking hold, they might very well say, oh, really? And then they'll go, okay. And that's the best you know that you've done it well when there's not even a hiccup. It's not a big deal. It's just okay, we like Jon. We already know Jon. He's taking over. They understand. And I agree with you that the driver's seat is the person that it's coming from, but it is a communication thing. It's all about communication with the client with the new person that's going to be taking on that role, and making them feel so super comfortable that it's just not a big deal for anybody. I think you have to, as the person that is transitioning, you have to be the driver in the way they feel about how it's happening. If I have great confidence in Jon as I'm transitioning a client to him, the client will have great, will feel really comfortable about it. But I have to feel, and I have to show that I have complete confidence in Jon. Gary told me one time, and I feel like I try to do this all the time, but he said, listen, I want them to know that the person taking that relationship from me is actually even better than I was. So that way they know that it is completely okay, that they're going to be in the hands of a different person. In a CPA firm, I find it really interesting because there are so many people that could be involved in some of the transitioning that they've actually been working with. Sometimes the client doesn't even know it, but they've been working with the person that's going to be taking that relationship for a long time. They just never have really met them. So I think that's a real opportunity in transitioning, is getting some of the people that are actually doing the work today, some of the deep work, get them involved in talking to the client ahead of time, sooner than they're going to be transitioning completely. I think that's a big deal. And I think that is, again, it's maybe something a little different than some of the firms out there have done in the past, but it is certainly important for you to start doing sooner than later, probably sooner than you think you should have to.
Yep.
If you were creating guidelines, so if you were in front of a firm today and you were creating guidelines for firm leaders to ensure that transitioning of relationships is successful, what are some must-dos, things that you would look at any CPA firm out there and say, this is what you need to do? What are some of the guidelines that you would give them, Jon?
Yeah, a few things that come to mind is first and foremost, I would start with, and most firms are familiar with this concept, even if they haven't done it, and that is ranking clients, categorizing. You can say ranking, you can say categorizing, you can say grouping, but saying, all right, if we had in that scenario that I shared earlier, Sandra, 100 clients that needed to be transitioned, well, it's probably unlikely that all 100 need the same transition plan. Or, frankly, that should even get the same transition plan. Right. And so there may be 10 of those that it is, the A clients that they need to be transitioned extremely well, extremely in a high touch, personal, maybe face-to-face, virtual meeting type way. And then you have on the other end of the spectrum, clients that the best way to transition them might be a letter, an email, a video introducing the new connection, the new person, things of that sort. What we want to make sure is we don't make mistakes where we're grouping them together and giving the wrong type of transition plan to the client. So that's one thing I would start with. Two is, and you said it well, it really starts with anytime a client transition is forced in any way or pressured in any way, it typically is off on the wrong foot. So my second piece of advice, and I'm speaking to those that have clients that need to take the lead on transitioning them, is you have to be confident that it's the right thing to do and that they're going to land at the right spot. If you're not there, then there's some work you probably need to do in order to make that happen. But that's one best practice as well. Maybe the conversation started from someone else that, hey, these client transitions need to happen, but you real quickly need to get on board. And then the third thing I would say kind of goes back to what I mentioned earlier is really take a good look at the three stakeholders in a client transition and really understand their perspectives. Sandra, one thing I'll say at this point is, is the assumption, sometimes there's the assumption that, hey, the best possible person on this planet to be serving this client is me and no one can serve them as well. Right. And that's just simply usually not the case.
True.
Now, does that person have great learnings and great experience that they need to pass off? Absolutely. But that's why there needs to be time for that. There needs to be, passing that information on, but really understand, hey, here are three stakeholders involved in this process, and how can we maximize the experience for everyone so the relationship ends up better than it was before.
Right. Well, Jon, we are probably right at the end of our 20 minutes today. So I just wondered if there's any last words of wisdom that you would like to give to our audience today as we close out.
Yes, I would. Kind of going back to the example I've kept using around 100 clients. Sometimes firms wait, or individuals and firms wait to start a client transition until they get it all figured out for those 100 clients. Don't wait to get it figured out for all 100 clients. Maybe choose 5 or 10 and say, okay, we're going to try this. We're going to see how it goes. And then let's take those learnings. Let's see it go well. And then we'll apply it to another 20 or 30 or 40 or 50. So bite-size this client transition if it gets you in motion. Don't let yourself be overwhelmed and frozen because you know there's so many clients that need to be transitioned that you just don't do anything about it.
Well said. Jon, it has been a pleasure working with you today and talking about this really important topic for every firm out there. So I want to thank all of you for joining us today. Listeners, if you enjoyed our topic, look out for new episodes every Tuesday morning. We like to rotate the topics and the themes, but the common theme among all the episodes is that we believe it is a critical issue for your firm's growth and success. So please subscribe, and thanks so much for listening. Have a fantastic day.